Hello and welcome to the European Football Show's Europa League Round of 16 preview with Breaking the Lines. In the build-up to the upcoming game week, we are dissecting each fixture with an assortment of guests from around the world. In today's clip, we look at FC Porto versus Olympique Lyon, one of several mouth-watering matchups awaiting us this coming week. To go in depth on FC Porto, we are joined by Breaking the Lines' very own Zach Lowy, who specialises in Portuguese football and is the host of Portuguese football themed podcast Cortalinhas. How are things going, Zach?
Hey, doing very well. Good to be back. Good to see Portuguese team doing well in Europe, and yeah, really excited for today's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, two of them still in European competition. You'd probably say a third one with in the shape of Benfica, who still have a chance going into the second leg of the Champions League round of 16 tie against Ajax. So Zach, FC Porto prevailed in the playoff qualification fixture against SS Lazio last time out by virtue of an aggregate score of 4-3 in what could be considered a slightly surprising result, one might say, especially considering that, if I do remember correctly, that you actually predicted Lazio to progress in the last round against Ostragoish. So, Zach, did you watch the match, and just how did Porto manage to defeat Maurizio Sarri's outfit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did watch the match. I knew it was going to be a very even match going into it, and it seemed like Lazio were the better team in the start of the first leg. But at the end of the day, we saw an example of Porto's individual brilliance, really in attack, carrying them to victory. With Tony Martinez, a player who has been a backup striker, this season, pretty incredible backup striker, getting a brace to lead them to a 2-1 victory in the first leg, and then Porto pretty comfortably progressing in the second leg, drawing 2-2 with Lazio's goal coming in the final minute. So overall, a very comfortable victory against Lazio.
Yeah, vital win that for FC Porto, and it also must be stressed too for the Portuguese Liga Primeira in the coefficient fight with the Netherlands for sixth place in the UEFA rankings. Because obviously, at the end of this season, that's when the rankings are reset for 2023-24. I mean, incredibly, Porto still remain in the Taça de Portugal and are currently 2-1 up going into the second leg of the semi-final in that competition against Sporting Club de Portugal, and they look to have landed on a winnable looking tie in the Europa League against Lyon. I certainly think this is a tie which, whilst not being easy, could have been a lot tougher for Ostragoish. So, in addition to currently being 6 points clear at the top of Liga Primera standings too. So Zach, are Portistas getting excited about dreams of a League Cup Europa League treble again, like they did under Andre Villas-Boas back in the 2010-11 legendary season? And just how have Porto managed to plug the sizable gap left by the sale of Luis Diaz to Liverpool so far? Has new Brazilian signing Galeno from Braga seen a good amount of play in action so far?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Porto, I think, are definitely a historic club when it comes to having a European pedigree. Without a doubt, the best Portuguese team in European football history. Really, typically the only team that does well. We saw it last season. Porto, coming very close against the eventual Champions League winners in Chelsea, and of course defeating Juventus. They are typically the number one Portuguese team when it comes to being in Europe. And ever since that defeat to Atletico de Madrid on the final Champions League match day, which frankly they deserved to win, they just couldn't put away those chances. Um, I definitely think that we are seeing a change almost in mentality from Sergio Conceição's side. They are a lot more focused, a lot more organized. I'd say to have the consistent run that they have had is it's absolutely incredible. Honestly, I mean, looking at what they have done, they have won every single game apart from three games, and two of those happened in the past week against Lazio, of course, which was more like a win than it was because it was obviously on aggregate. And we also saw them drawing to Gil Vicente in the previous weekend, and that's definitely something that is worth pointing out because Gil Vicente were playing with a man advantage since the second minute. So obviously it definitely feels stubborn. If you are a Porto supporter, Porto supporter to drop those points. But with that being said, they still managed to pick up a very comfortable result, a good 2-1 win, where they weren't always the better side, but at the end of the day, they got the result that mattered. We saw that last month in the 2-2 draw against Sporting to cling on to a 6-point advantage and erase an early 2-goal deficit. But yeah, I mean, Porto are getting the results. You cannot argue about that. But I definitely think that, and I said it before on the podcast, that the loss of Luis Diaz, you really notice that, I think, more than anything in big games like this of this European caliber sides, and they brought in a player from Braga, Wenderson Galeno. They were linked with two options, Galeno and another Brazilian winger, Samuelino. Samuelino supposedly going to Atletico de Madrid in the summer transfer window. We'll see what happens there. But looking at the other player, Wenderson Galeno, he actually came on against Gil Vicente in the 30th minute for another January signing in Steven Eustáquio, but he did pretty poorly and he got taken off in the 66th minute. But with that being said, they've been able to compensate for Diaz's departure. Perhaps not with wingers, Pepe, likes of Pepe and Francisco Conceição doing okay, but more in other positions such as midfield, right, with Vitinha and Fabio Vieira offering a ton of creativity. Mehdi Taremi, a player who, on his day, I would say is the best striker in Portugal. For me, he has had somewhat of a decline in production and has made some really costly misses this season. But with that being said, still such a valuable player, and kind of a hybrid of a 9 and a 10, I would say. He's that goal scorer, he's that center forward, but he also has the mind and the technique, I'd say, of a 10. And we saw that in the game against Gil Vicente, where he played a 1-2 with, I think it was Otavio, made the run and headed it into the path of Evan Nielsen, who tapped it in. Porto obviously could not get a second goal, so instead of being 8 points clear, they are still just 6 points clear. But for me, that really showcased like what he is capable of. A combination of a 9 and a 10. And when you've got a Taremi who's playing like this, who's really hitting his form in the home stretch of the season, you have to be considered a legitimate force on all three fronts.
Some great insight there from Zach. I think it's remarkable the job that Sergio Conceição is doing at Porto. Remarkable stuff. I think they're still unbeaten, aren't they, at the top of the Liga Primeira? Still unbeaten, 6 points clear. Just a remarkable job that he's doing there. So on to the match now against Lyon, the upcoming match against Lyon in the Europa League round of 16. If you had to summarise in a couple of sentences, Zach, where Porto could win this tie, what would you say?
Well, I was on another, actually a Lyon-based podcast on Monday where I discussed this. Honestly, where I think Porto can win and will win the battle is really in the box. For me, that's the biggest key. I think that when it comes to midfields, I think it's very close. We see how I think that's going to be a close affair. You look at Lyon's options; they got Maxence Kakare, Houssem Aouar, Tanguy and Ndombele back, Thiago Mendes. They have some very convincing options. Of course, Lucas Paqueta probably going to be the most dangerous man going into this match from a Porto standpoint. So they've definitely got their fair share of options in the center of the pitch. But where I think this game will be won for Porto's perspective is in the box. I think that looking at Porto's options in the final third, right? We've mentioned Mehdi Taremi, Evan Nielsen, the two players who combined for Porto's lone goal against Gil Vicente, and two players who really were the thorn in the side of Sporting's defense yesterday. I think that looking at those two players, and of course Tony Martinez, who scored the brace against Lazio in the first leg to take them through, they have some incredible options there. not to mention the likes of Vitinha, Fabio Vieira, Otavio behind them. I think they've got some great weapons, and they definitely have a few ways to hurt Lyon and their defense, which for me has been their biggest weak link under Peter Bosz this season. I definitely think that, looking at their options, Castello Luqueba, he has done well, and has had somewhat of a breakout season at Lyon, but he's still, a fairly young prospect. You've got the likes of Jerome Boateng. I personally like Porto's options a little bit more in that respect.
Lovely stuff there. And one last thing from Porto's perspective, Zach, I'd like you to give me a prediction for the tie, please. It could either be an aggregate score over the two legs or just simply who do you think will win?
Yeah, overall, I think that Porto will have enough in the tank to get it done and go through. When you look at the past, 3 months, they are one of the best teams in Europe right now. And I just think that Lyon have been far too hot and cold. Yes, they have had some good results in this tournament before in the Europa League, and so you definitely have to respect that pedigree. But you also have to respect Porto's, albeit they are a bit more used to playing in the Champions League, but they still know how to, get it done in a European competition. Overall, one thing that I was quite impressed with in yesterday's win against Sporting is really their never say quit, never say die attitude. And another player I was very impressed with was Chancel Mbemba in the start of defense. His performances have been a bit shaky this season, but overall, very strong both in physical battles, in anticipation. Really impressed me, and a player who is out of contract in the summer. I don't know if a team like Lyon, perhaps, I could potentially see them making a move for him on a free transfer. But putting in a very good performance, a performance that frankly we had not seen a lot of in recent years. I would say in recent months. So if you get that Chancel Memba, I definitely think that Porto should feel good about their chances going up against this team.
So that was the lowdown on FC Porto's chances from Zach. And now let's take an in-depth look into their opponents, Olympique Lyonnais, who, as you may well be aware, reached this stage of the Europa League thanks to topping a group containing Rangers FC, Sparta Prague and Brøndby. Joining me to preview their chances is Tom Abadie. Tom has participated in several of our Twitter spaces at Breaking the Lines, and in addition produces content for Football English, an English language Lyon podcast, Tea Time Tom, which I was proudly a guest on for a Conference League special just recently, Café Commerce OL, Ballon Rond et La Causerie. Tom, how are you? Hope you are well, and a huge thank you for joining us for this Europa League preview.
I'm very well. I'm very impressed by the attempt at pronouncing all the media work for in French. I'm very impressed.
I can speak French, Tom. I can speak French. It's not brilliant, but I need some practice. But yes, I will be getting around to that in the summer, hopefully. All fingers crossed when the football season is finally finished.
Sounds good.
So Lyon, could it be argued so far, Tom, that so far this season has been a little disappointing domestically, with Legon currently only sitting sixth in France's Ligue 1. However, the 7 times champions of France have fared much better in the Europa League so far. They topped the Europa League group with 16 points out of a maximum 18. So, Tom, how would you assess Lyon's season so far?
It's been a bumpy ride, that's for sure. I mean, for anyone that follows anything that Peter Bosz has done in the past, they will know that it's not usually a steady ride throughout the season, and it's definitely been that much of a heart attack every other game. So I think Europa League, it feels like such a long time since we played. We played the last game back in December, a very boring 1-1 draw against Rangers, which didn't really count for anything. Yeah, it's been a bit of a complicated one. I think the attack has been changed so many times between injuries and managerial changes, which have been questionable. Playing Lucas Paqueta as centre forward for much of autumn was a bit of a weird one. Weirdly enough, I think we've done so well in Europe, but also it's been, if you look really in depth of each game, it's not easy either. You take the Sparta game, which we were losing, I think 2-0, 2-1 at half time. We eventually won 4-3. It's not exactly the steady ride that we expected, but it definitely been disappointed in Ligue 1. But we've recently come up with a 4-1 win on Friday, and there was a bit of hope that things can kick off from there. But we said this exactly about the Nice game a few weeks ago. So it's all up in arms. I think we'll eventually make Europe because the new signings of Fevre and Ndombele are only coming into the team and doing really well. Will we go far in Europe? Well, I guess that's the next point we have to discuss.
Yeah, it really does seem to me like the door is very much open for Lyon to potentially, yes, still get top three in this season in Ligue 1. It really is so tight in the race for the European places. I had a look early this morning behind PSG. Currently just 11 points separate second place OGC Nice and 10th place AS Monaco. It's going to be a fascinating tussle to qualify for Europe next season with just 11 games remaining in the campaign. Now, Lyon, of course, are under the management of a new coach this season in the shape of Peter Bosz, the Dutchman shot to fame during the 2016-17 campaign as a coach when he led AFC Ajax to the Europa League final where they lost to Manchester United. A disappointing short spell then followed for Bosz at Borussia Dortmund the following season. And then after that, Bosz then spent 3 years at Bayer Leverkusen. Bosz's highlights there included steering Workself to a fourth place finish in the 2018-19 season, in addition to reaching a DFB Pokal final in 2019-20 before he took the Lyon job this summer after being axed at Leverkusen towards the end of last season. So, Tom, how do you think Bosz has done so far at Lyon as a coach? What changes tactically, personnel-wise and formations-wise have occurred under Bosz at Lyon compared to previous coach Rudy Garcia?
Well, Rudy Garcia was definitely not a loved character. I think it's pretty fair to say that we really hated him by the end of his time in France. But what's changed? I think primarily recently, at least, we've played free at the back a lot. Although briefly we've moved back before, but there's been a bit more of an attacking output, not just passing the ball around at the back. It's also a bit more direct, giving. Well, at the time, Bruno Guimaraes got more opportunities to move forward and bring the ball forward. Now, obviously, he's left, but Ndombele is sort of slotted straight back into that role. I think it's just generally giving confidence back to some players. Tukur Kambi was very far from being the top player that he is this year when Peter Bosz came in. So he's given confidence to players. He's proven that he can build a team around certain key players. Maxence Cacré has been immense this year. However, I think there's a global understanding that he's slightly stubborn. I think he believes in his beliefs, and that's great, but he's not willing to change much. So substitutions really take a lot of time to come in, and even tactical and personnel changes really don't, reflect necessarily what the games are saying. Take the captain Leo Dubois, who's very unpopular amongst the fans because he's not playing very well, and he can at best play 60 minutes because he's got no stamina. But he's our captain, and yet he's being played week in, week out because he's the captain. So the only opportunities for Malo Gusto, who usually plays very well, is when Dubois is out for injury, which is often not that much of the case. So I've been overly happy with Bosz. I think it's a lot healthier in the club since he's arrived. I think that the main reason for mismanagement and so on is down to his beliefs and being very stubborn and so on. But as long as the club all walk in the same direction, I think there's big things that can come, which unfortunately with all us, you just never quite know where the club is actually going. Juninho left from sporting director in January. That was a bit unexpected, but he was just fed up with the club. So we hope that at least some changes will come from the top in months to come. But as far as Bosz is concerned, I think we've overly been pretty impressed. So happy with the changes.
Fantastic insight there from Tom. So now onto the upcoming tie against FC Porto, arguably the most intriguing match between these two sides. Previously in European competition came in the 2003-04 season when, at the quarter-final stage of the Champions League, Porto defeated Lyon 4-2 on aggregate, en route to winning the Champions League title under Jose Mourinho. So, Tom, if you had to summarise in a couple of sentences where Lyon can win this tie, what would you say?
I think there's definitely belief in individual players. Obviously the team itself works pretty well. It always depends on the days, but usually works quite well. Obviously, I have a slight worry in the defensive partnership. Thiago Mendes has been playing there a lot recently, and it's not exactly centre back and has been a bit poor, especially against Lille a few days ago. But if Bosch reintegrates Jerome Boateng into the team and uses the European experience, then maybe something can work there. If the wing backs play really well, like they did this weekend, then we're in for a shot. Wide attacking players are the main stakeholder, I think, from Porto, from what I've understood. And if we have a very good central midfield, so we'll be able, I hope, to control that central midfield. But as long as we use well the wide attackers, wide wing backs, and so on, and control their wingers as well, then we're in for a shot. There's also a worry of lack of efficiency up front, which has been inherent at the club for many years. But hopefully, if Dembele can be fully fit and at his best, then we can throw in a few crosses in there and he can score some good goals. Where are we going to win this game? I think ultimately it's going to be down to individual differences. I think tactically and the whole shape of the team, both teams are good, but can have a few shaky moments. Think back to Porto's draw against Sporting a few weeks ago, which was a bit up and down. But I think both teams are similar and want the ball, so I'll be interested to see who's going to get possession. But ultimately, it's going to be down to small differences, as it usually is in Europe. So good dribbling, direct attacking play. I think that's what we can expect from Lyon. Whether they'll be implemented with the possession ball or with counter attacks, I don't know yet. But I'm hoping we can get at least decent results away. Obviously, I think we start with the home game. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Lyon host the game on Wednesday, and we go to Portugal afterwards.
No, I think it's because Porto came through the qualifying round there at home.
Okay, so
and then Lyon, it's at Groupama Stadium second leg.
Okay, so we got to hope for a good result away. Obviously, there's not away goals anymore, which changes a lot of things. So really, scoring a goal doesn't really change all that much. But I seriously doubt that Bosch is going to go all defensive and hope for the best for a 1-0 or just 1-0 draw, 1-0 loss. I think as long as we go back to Groupama Stadium with only a 1-goal deficit, then we're definitely in for a shot. Anything above 2 or 3. I know Constantao, and I've seen him manage at Nantes, especially. He's capable of locking up the game and just playing all defensive, which could be a lot more difficult for Lyon in next week's game.
Excellent stuff. And finally, Tom, one last thing. I'd like you to give me a score prediction for this tie, please. It could either be an aggregate score, just simply which of the two sides you think will progress, or if you're feeling very bold, both.
Okay, well, I think we'll lose 2-1 in Portugal and win 2-0 in Lyon, so a 3-2 aggregate score to Lyon.
Perfect stuff. Huge thank you there to both Zach and Tom. And that, folks, is your lowdown on FC Porto versus Olympique Lyon.